Okay, and I welcome everyone coming out on this evening to Zoom. We're going to be having an evening, as I just said, an evening of Mark Levine. He's going to be, he'll be talking. Some of us have some questions, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. And there's Jerry messaging everybody. Yes, I'm seeing some new names, so welcome to the new people. Hopefully more will be coming on. And without it's actually before we start, I just also, those of us executive board members that it's on, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Jerry Frank and Joe, my executive vice president, and we have our district leaders, Sylvia DiPietro and Charles Bayer. So we thank you all for coming on. And Mark, you got the floor. Can tell a little bit about yourself and
thank you, Mindy.
Coming up, you're welcome.
Thank you, CRDC. It is great to see you all tonight. With the forecast, I'm actually glad we're doing this on Zoom. And I'm happy to spend a little time with all of you. I'm hearing a little bit of echo. I'm not sure what that is. If maybe folks can mute if they're not speaking, that would be great. There is late breaking news out of the city council I'm going to want to talk to you about tonight. We passed a really big package of bills today that protect the rights of delivery workers, food delivery workers. And I want to tell you about those bills and what they mean. And I want to tell you about an important bill that I passed just a couple of weeks ago out of the health committee that will have implications for Chelsea specifically. It will help a number of neighborhoods, again, including Chelsea, get access to primary medical care for people who are uninsured. And so we'll definitely want to talk about that. But, and then of course, the big picture about the future of our borough and our city. And mostly I just want to talk to you all and hear your questions and get your feedback and have a conversation. But as Mindy said, I'm just going to take one quick minute to tell you a little about my background. Some of you are folks I don't know super well yet. I actually, like Mindy, I started my career as a public school teacher. I taught junior high school math and science in District 7. I studied physics in college, didn't want to spend my life in a lab, so I became a teacher and actually a bilingual math and science teacher. I speak Spanish. And I say in all seriousness that as tough as being an elected official is, it's only the second hardest job I've ever had in my life. Teaching is definitely harder. I have a deep appreciation for all of you who have devoted your life to that incredibly important career. And being a teacher really launched me into a life of community work. I went on to start a nonprofit in Uptown Manhattan, a community development credit union. It's called Neighborhood Trust, based on 166th Street off of St. Nicholas Avenue. It's made thousands of small loans to people in the neighborhood, actually $25 million of what we call micro loans, helping people do everything from buy their first home computer to start a small business. The repayment rate is 98%. So it really is proof of the power of giving people an opportunity, helping low-income families uptown. And that's really the base that allowed me to run for office. 5,000 members in the credit union when I first ran. And I'm so proud to have won election twice in the 7th Council District, a fabulously diverse and dynamic district. It runs from 96th Street on the west side up through Morningside Heights, West Harlem, and into Washington Heights, where I live with my family. My wife, Evelise, and our 2 boys, age 18 and 21, both products of the public schools. One is still in the public schools as a student at CUNY at City College. And our baby just started at Temple a few weeks ago, which we're very sad about, but happy for him. It's been an incredible 8 years in the council. I chaired the Parks Committee my first term. I'm so devoted to green space, to public space. I just see it as essential to life in the city and really an equity issue that maybe we can talk more about. In my first term, I passed legislation that made New York City the first place in America to establish right to counsel for tenants facing eviction in housing court. It's been a game changer in New York City. It has started a national movement. Now 8 other cities and 1 state have already followed our lead, and this legislation is gaining traction in Congress as well. but it all started here, and it has really impacted housing court here. It's lowered the eviction rate as of pre-pandemic, lowered it 40%, helping thousands of families remain in their home. And it's going to be extremely important as we come out of the pandemic, and eventually when the eviction moratorium is lifted, now thankfully pushed back to January. But at that time, we could face an avalanche of evictions. It's going to be critical that every single tenant have the benefit of an attorney. And so we're working very, very hard to make sure that the system that we've built of legal representation for tenants is able to handle this load going forward. As I think many of you know, I chair the health committee this term. And so in that capacity, I've put my heart and soul into standing up against this pandemic, speaking out for equity on behalf of science and compassion, clear communication to the public over the last 18 or 19 months. No matter who I've had to take on, obviously, when the evil man was still in the White House, we had major challenges there. But I've also stood up when I had to against state and city policy as well. And I have the scars to show for that. And maybe we'll talk more about the pandemic tonight. We've made incredible progress thanks to vaccination, and we have real challenges ahead. I'm expecting that we'll still have real challenges throughout the fall and probably into the early winter, and happy to talk about that. And I'm really just honored now to have won the Democratic nomination to be the next Manhattan Borough president. I don't know if the wonderful State Senator Brad Hoylman's on or will come tonight. I know he has a busy schedule, but he is a great friend, an ally, and someone who I'm really looking forward to working with over the coming months and years. And we have a really big agenda for Manhattan. I talked about tenants' rights. We have to do even more to protect vulnerable tenants. We have to really take unprecedented measures to build more affordable housing in the midst of what is really an emergency on that front. We need a multi-front effort to protect our family-owned businesses, our small businesses that are really facing an existential threat after the last year and a half. And so I've spoken out about, I've actually have a close co-sponsor of a bill now to apply rent control to commercial spaces in part to help protect small businesses. I really do believe we have to roll back rents amidst this very difficult economic environment. We need to get small businesses relief from fines and fees. We need to get them access to credit and capital. And we also need to get them access to legal services, especially small immigrant-owned businesses when they face lawsuits or harassment by their landlords. And I'm working on all of those measures. I am, as I mentioned, deeply devoted to green space and public space, whether it's sidewalks, streets, rooftops, parks. And I think we can have a renaissance now of all those wonderful public spaces after this pandemic, when people have really fallen in love all over again with our parks, and really public space, outdoor space has been more important to this city than ever. But we need investments, and it's something I'm very devoted to. And I'll be focusing on this in a big way as borough president. Climate change and resiliency, the greatest challenge of our age, is very much a challenge for Manhattan, both because we have to do even more to reduce climate greenhouse gas emissions in our big buildings, in our transportation network, in our food network, in the way that we process waste and trash. All of these are climate issues, without a doubt. As we push for more recycling and composting, that has a climate impact. As we push to change our food system and source more locally and have more plant-based diets as opposed to animal-based diets, that also has climate impact and is very much on my agenda. But while we fight to reduce greenhouse gases, to electrify our vehicle fleet, to push public transportation, we've also got to deal with the climate change that is here. And boy, is Manhattan in the crosshairs, as we learned not only in Hurricane and Superstorm Sandy, but over the two terrible storms of the last month, where many parts of this island flooded, and not just the traditional coastal areas that are low-lying, but some parts of the borough which are nowhere near the water and even elevated, including, of course, the C train stop in Chelsea, but very horrible flooding in Washington Heights and Inwood. in areas that are way above sea level and not next to the river. When the flooding's coming just from rain, everywhere is vulnerable. And so we really have to harden our infrastructure to prepare for that, to build our resiliency on the coastline, to improve our sewers and drainage systems, and to green our infrastructure so that street trees have bioswales under them to collect rainwater, so that impermeable surfaces in parks can now absorb rainwater. So we have green roofs that can also absorb rainwater and cool the environment. This has to be a top priority, even while we fight to reduce greenhouse gases. So this is some of what I'm going to be fighting for as borough president. And now, as I promised, I want to update you on a couple important legislative items that are kind of breaking news out of the council. I see we have been joined by, is Louis Choden Brown on? I thought I saw Louis's name. He is. So it's a little intimidating talking about legislation in the city council when the greatest legislative mind to ever walk into City Hall is on the Zoom. So Louis is free to correct me. But I'll tell you first about this package of bills today that we passed to help protect the rights of delivery workers, or what are known really as deliveristas, because many of them, the vast majority, are Spanish speaking, and that's the term that they have adopted. Really heroes of this pandemic who have made it possible for people to shelter in place, to stay home and still get food. And they have been out there day and night in all kinds of weather, even incredibly in the two storms we've had in the past month. But they really have had a whole host of challenges imposed on them, primarily by app-based delivery services, in some cases by restaurants as well. And so there's a package of bills we passed of it today, which I take no credit for. I'm celebrating the work of my colleagues. I think that the sponsors include, of course, our speaker, Cora Johnson, Councilmember Carlina Rivera, Councilmember Justin Brannon, Councilmember Brad Lander, Councilmember Carlos Menchaca, and I think I've covered them. But these bills first require that restaurants offer a restroom to delivery workers. There are many cases where the people delivering our food are not getting access to restaurants from the restaurants that they're working with. And that's really a public health issue. And so I'm grateful for legislation we passed today that will require that. There's a variety of ways in which the apps are going to improve. First of all, the apps are no longer allowed to charge fees for simply paying out to delivery workers. Yes, that has happened. Some of the delivery apps will charge workers for refrigerated bags, which are very expensive, as much as $50. That will no longer be allowed. Also, there's going to be greater transparency on the way tips work, so that customers understand just whether the entire tip goes to the worker or whether part of it is shaved off for the app or the restaurant. Also, there's new protections for workers based on the geography in which they can deliver. Up till now, if they were asked to deliver to an unreasonable distance and said no, they would be penalized, and that will no longer be allowed. Workers will be allowed to delineate a distance at which they're comfortable working and not be penalized for that. And there may be some more details that I omitted, but very excited about this package of bills. Finally, and then we'll pass it over to you for questions, I just want to tell you about a bill that, oh my goodness, this is another one that Louis has labored on for 7 years that will really expand access to primary care for New Yorkers who are uninsured and who are uninsurable. Now, that includes a large number of undocumented New Yorkers. Hundreds of thousands make up a total of about 600,000 uninsured people. But also, there's a small number of people who maybe they are gig workers or freelancers, or for other reasons don't qualify for discounted insurance on the state exchange. So for them, there's a solution that's been in place that the council fought for, which now we're expanding. The program is called NYC Care, which gives anyone who's not insured a home for their primary care doctor, to get their annual physical, to get their vaccinations, preventative checks, to get referrals to specialists, to get access when they need it to ophthalmological and prescription services. a customer service line, all the things you'd want for anyone to have as the basis of medical care, and the things that people lacked throughout this pandemic, and it had deadly implications. So this program called NYC Care, which probably many of you have not heard about, has been pretty limited. It's only offered in public hospital facilities. Well, there's a problem because many neighborhoods don't have a public hospital facility known as Health and Hospitals, or H&H, including pretty much the entire west side of Manhattan, from Chelsea on north to Washington Heights. And for someone who's undocumented, that really is a barrier. Someone who's uninsured, again, it's a barrier that we are now fixing with the bill that we passed, which will require the city to have a community clinic, a nonprofit community clinic, available in any neighborhood where there's not a public hospital or public hospital run clinic. And that will elevate this wonderful network of nonprofit, often immigrant-led community health centers that will be a resource now around the city. And we have to find out which we think is the best provider in Chelsea, and I'll be willing to work with you to advocate for that to be included in the program. So I'm going to pause there and say again how excited I am to work with CRDC, with all of you as progressive champions on many of the issues facing us. And I'm happy to turn it over to you for your questions and comments. Back to you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you, everyone. And just so we know how we're going to be doing this, we're going to be opening up to questions and answers in just a few moments. As most of you know, I am a teacher, so I do have some education questions that
Great.
as I was reviewing my questions, they're all tied because of things that are coming up next week, which I'll get to in 1 second. But after education, our questions, Joe has a few questions, and then how we're going to be doing. If you have a question, please raise your hand on the Zoom box, and I'm going to go in order of having the questions. I see Louis is, are you asking a new question or? Sorry.
Yeah, but after you and Joe.
Oh, okay. you just were making sure you were first.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I'm proactive. What can I tell you?
Thanks, Louis. Okay, so I'm going to try to give brief little backstory because it's all going to connect next week. On Monday, I'm sure most of you have heard in the public schools that there's a vaccine mandate, and that goes into effect as of Monday. And those staff members that are not at least having the first vaccine or not agreeing to the first dose of the vaccine, they're going to be put on leave for at least a year, or they can agree to a severance package. Now, what this is going to cause is a lot of chaos, obviously, in the schools, because for those that do not get the vaccine, they're not going to be in the schools. They're not going to be in the classrooms. And our kids are still coming to schools. So this opens up an organizational issue. And also the CDC guidelines for quarantine rules also change as of Monday. So with the staff possibly, being out because of not being vaccinated, and then you have the new mandates and everything is happening next week, how would you like to, where would you start to tackle everything, or to try to parents that are nervous, or, what's going on?
Well, thank you to you, Mindy. And I don't know if there's other educators on, but my goodness, what you've done for our kids over the last year and a half, it's just incredible. Undoubtedly the hardest year and a half you've had on the job.
Oh, yeah.
And but we needed you, and you were there for our kids, and that means a lot. It's now really important that we stop at nothing to protect school communities, students and staff. Vaccination is just by far the best tool we have. It's priorities 1, 2, and 3. There are others as well, which I'll talk about, but none as important as vaccination. And the good news is that the last stat I heard is that 87% of teachers are vaccinated. And I think amongst all school staff, it's 80%, a little bit lower. Everyone who's going to be working in schools does really need to be vaccinated. As you said, the mandate takes effect on Monday of next week. I do support it. And I first and foremost support it for the good of staff who are saving their own lives. If they get the vaccine, they're protecting their families and their communities, but also for the benefit of kids, even kids who are 12 plus, but certainly for younger children who can't be vaccinated, it's an enormous threat if the teachers are unvaccinated, but also older kids. There are children who are immunocompromised and they don't get the full immune benefit out of vaccination. So we have to protect them. And currently we have not mandated vaccination for children, something that I would probably be open to. But in the meantime, there are unvaccinated kids, even in middle and high school. So for all those reasons, we need everyone to be vaccinated. I'm worried about what it does to the operations of the school system if down to the wire, not enough people make the right decision and get their first shot. The chancellor says that they have it covered. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'll say I'm worried about it. But I want to drive home the message of how critical it is that everyone get vaccinated. There's a lot more to talk about in school safety, which I can get into if folks want to. I'm particularly concerned about the low level of testing, both the regular PCR testing, which is the gold standard where you send it to a lab. We're only doing 10% a week, only of students, not staff, only of unvaccinated kids, and finally only of those kids whose family signed consent. Compare that to Los Angeles, where they're testing 100% of the school community, everyone, adult, student, vaxxed, unvaxxed, every week. Again, we're only doing 10% and a much more limited population. But what really disturbs me is our failure to adopt the self rapid tests, so-called antigen tests, as an important tool. These are tests that you can administer at home. You get an answer in 15 minutes. It's kind of like a pregnancy test. They're relatively inexpensive. And some school systems are using them in really important ways, especially if you have a child in a classroom or an adult, someone in a classroom who tests positive. You can send everyone home with the pack of these self-tests and say, you can come in tomorrow, you can come in every day as long as you get a negative test that morning. And if you got test positive, you stay home. It's a way to get people back to school, but safely. And so for a while, the school system had a plan of just sending everyone home and forcing them to stay there and not giving them a chance to test to come back in until after a week. But now they've gone the other extreme and they're letting almost everyone come back except the kid who tested positive, but with no extra testing. So neither of those extremes to me is the right way to do it. So I'm a strong advocate for testing. If there's interest in time, we can talk about ventilation and some of the other factors, but there's a lot on the line and we can really have to do everything we can to keep our kids and our staff safe in schools.
I mean, one thing I wanted to mention when you were saying about how the chancellor said that they have it covered, what they are doing, and this is the latest that I heard from this afternoon, that they are trying to hire subs, but they're not. But just based on the numbers now, they're not going to have enough, because I was on a meeting and one District 75 school alone had 150 that still had not uploaded their information to the vaccine portal. So let's just say those 150 do not get vaccinated, come Monday. They don't think there's a good probability that 150 subs are going to be sent in. And that's when the whole, the other part of my question that was coming in is, with these possible staff deficits, it's already improbable that 3 feet has been able to be maintained consistently, but staffing is going to be crunched and rooms going to be crunched. So that's why next week is going to be a week of chaos.
Let's hope not, but I'm worried as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy.
Joe
had a
you're up.
question?
Sure. Hi, Mark. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Joe.
My question for you is, I mean, this has been a prevalent issue for a long time, but especially since the start of the pandemic, there's been a big increase in homelessness in Chelsea, but also all over New York. And I'm curious, like, what you think we should do in kind of short term to address, what we're all experiencing, but then also if there's anything you think we can start to implement long term to curb the homelessness, epidemic that we have in New York.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a humanitarian crisis that tens of thousands of our fellow New Yorkers are in shelters every night. A population that is mostly families. There's a misconception, but about 2/3, I believe, are families. And I think last I heard about 40% are children. That's who's in the shelters. And then, of course, thousands of our fellow New Yorkers are not in shelters. They are living unsheltered on the streets and other places in the city, which is just heartbreaking. And it's years of failures that got us into this mess. And it's going to take years of work to get us out. But, I'll talk about some of what I think we have to do short term and long term. I think that there's a right and wrong way to do outreach. And to simply go to someone on the street and say, do you want shelter? And if the answer is no, you move on. It's not enough. You need to build a relationship. You need to build trust. There are some outreach programs which do this. Sometimes it's offering them water and clean socks, things to build trust and confidence. As much as possible, you want to offer things like safe haven beds, which for those who don't know, it's a special class of shelter that doesn't have the usual barriers to entry. For example, it doesn't require a drug screening. It's called a housing first model, but it gets people off the street, and then you can have intensive service provision. And the rooms tend to be smaller than the large congregate shelters. And so they tend to be more attractive and tend to be accepted by people on the street. But we've also got to build more of the ultimate long-term solution, which is supportive housing, which is affordable housing that includes 24/7 services, drug treatment, mental health, job training, et cetera. Really proud we've built a 200-unit affordable housing development in my district on 108th Street. I think that there is opportunity now with vacant hotels and potentially vacant office buildings to do some conversions. Hotels particularly are relative to other conversions quicker because you have the basic structure of individual rooms, whereas office conversions are tougher because you have to run sewer lines and things like that all over, which is very difficult and time consuming. But so this crisis might offer opportunities to quickly convert some vacant properties to supportive housing, something that we very much need. And we have to do much better on mental health and drug treatment, which are intimately tied with homelessness. The mental health system in in this administration has, I feel, too much focused on things like depression and anxiety, which are very important, but not enough emphasize really chronic mental health challenges like schizophrenia, which is more likely to be driving homelessness. And on drug treatment, I'm a true believer in the harm reduction model. And specifically, I support safe injection facilities, which bring people in off the street. They can administer drugs under supervision. It prevents fatalities, but there's a really big secondary benefit, which often then you have an opportunity to connect people to services when they come in. And so we're trying to get them up and running. Governor Cuomo had pretty much killed it, given it a slow death. I'm hopeful that Governor Hochul will finally make it happen. So I feel like I've gone on too long, but Joe, it's a big, complicated issue. Would you like to add anything to the items I mentioned? I'd love to hear your input.
Interesting. No, it's honestly, this is something that I think it spawned from conversations we've had over the last year or so. And initially in regards to what my subsequent question was going to be, which is about police reform, because we're seeing more it seemed like in years past, we've seen a lot of police involvement in something that was really a mental health issue. And I'm glad you brought up the safe injection site point, because I remember that's something that I had heard brought up in the past and haven't really seen take off the way I think it could, because I do feel like that would be an opportunity to really jump in and get more involvement, or have the opportunity to be a little more proactive with people who are at high risk. But I also agree that I think that this is a serious mental health crisis as much as it is anything else, and obviously comes back to providing safe and providing opportunities for people who need that assistance. But the one other question I had for you, and then we can go over to Lewis, was as it relates to NYPD, obviously with the hopefully soon to be Mayor Adams, who has a lot of thoughts on what he wants to do with the NYPD, along with Black Lives Matter last year. There's just been a lot of questions about how to reform the police. And I was just curious on your take of what you'd like to see reform look like over the next upcoming years.
Yeah, look, it's super important. Very quick on safe injection facilities, Joe. The city has a plan that I worked as health chair to help negotiate along with a group of advocates to open 4 safe injection facilities. One is in the West 30s, one is in Washington Heights, one is in the Bronx, and one is in downtown Brooklyn. This is the plan that we negotiated, that we got the mayor to agree to after a couple of years fight. Big shout out to my colleague in the council, Steve Levine, who chairs general welfare, who was super active on this. But it's been sitting on the desk of essentially the state health department, but really controlled by the governor now for, I think, almost 3 years. And so this is the plan we want to get into motion as a first step. But as for policing, look, we have a twin imperative of obviously keeping everybody safe, keeping every neighborhood safe, but by fixing what's broken in policing and making it fairer and more just, and eradicating systemic racism in criminal justice, in policing and in the criminal justice system more broadly. We can do both of those two things. It starts with accountability. And the truth is, there are people on the force today who have committed fireable offenses, everything from assaulting a suspect in custody to lying under oath. Most horrifically, examples like Daniel Pantaleo. He's now been fired, but it took 5 years, inexcusable, after he murdered Eric Garner. We need accountability, and that is going to require some structural change. The Civilian Complaint Review Board, which at the time it was developed, was very controversial and was a huge step forward, really doesn't go far enough, because it leaves the ultimate authority to decide the punishment in the hands of the police commissioner. So the CCRB does investigation, very important. They make a recommendation of whatever the consequences would be, but then the commissioner has free hand to overturn it, and often does. And so you need, either the CCRB should have the ability to actually determine discipline consequences without it being overruled, or potentially you could have another body, but it has to be independent of the police commissioner, so that we really do have consequences for misconduct in a way that we don't. There's a variety of other reform measures that I'm working on. One is the way the city stores and uses DNA. And this is something I want to give huge credit to Senator Hoylman on, because he's got some very good state legislation on this. But there are unfortunately, there are a lot of problems in the way DNA is stored, often collected among people without their consent or knowledge, including even minors. And there's no good way to understand whether you're in the DNA database, and no good way to get it removed. And so we need to tighten all of that up. And we have some bills in the city council, and there's some excellent bills in Albany that would prescribe the conditions in which DNA can be collected, and determine how it can be used, and expunge records that are there in ways that are not consistent with those rules. So, and on safety, I mean, I don't know if you want me to talk about that, but I did mention that's a twin priority. And we have to invest first in the infrastructure, the social infrastructure that we know keeps people safe, whether it is youth development programming, employment training, public health programming, parks maintenance. All those things are proven through research, through data, to contribute to public safety. We want to invest in cure violence programs, which short circuit conflict before it escalates. And yes, policing is part of the solution, but it has to be done in a fair way, and policing should not be in some of the domains where it has crept into, like mental health response, as you correctly identified over the years. There's a very exciting pilot program now where precincts, now I think, I forget the number, but maybe half a dozen at this point are up and running on a pilot program where the precincts can dispatch a crisis response team that does not include a police officer. It includes, I believe, an EMT tech and I think a social worker and a psychiatrist. I might have the exact mix of staff wrong there. But nonetheless, it doesn't include a police officer. And so this is available when you call for help if you don't believe that there's a threat of violence imminent. This is very exciting. It's been done in other parts of the country. It has reduced conflict, reduced fatalities at the hands of police. This is the kind of thing we can do to make sure that we have a social service response when it's warranted. So there you go, Joe. Long answer to a complicated problem. I really appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Thanks. I didn't ask you simple ones. I know.
No, you
Go
didn't.
ahead, Mindy.
Lewis actually had to take a call, so he'll be back in a
Okay,
moment.
great.
So we're gonna take a question from Charles. You're on mute, Charles. There you
Yeah, I just did. I'd like your take on the Empire State Project, which is going to have an enormous impact on this neighborhood.
Yes. So the project is in flux. So I think tonight we were going to talk mostly about that. And I think that you all have determined that to go into depth, we really need to wait until Empire State comes back with the provisions. But I'm happy just to talk in some generalities now while we're waiting the updated plan. I want to thank, I don't know if CRDC has been involved, but there have been some amazing community leaders who have gotten involved in the CAC, I think it's called the Community Advisory Committee, that have really pushed back in ways that, if Empire State adheres to the recommendations, are really going to be helpful. I know you've pushed back on density and height. I know you've pushed back on a variety of factors impacting the streetscape. You want a vibrant streetscape. You've pushed back on governance so that the community actually has meaningful input. And if I understand right, I think the goals of the community are obviously to upgrade the train station and the transit infrastructure, but to do it in a way that respects livability and human scale in the neighborhood. And Penn South, of course, essentially abuts that project. And there are some development parcels very, very close to Penn South. And whereas some of the parcels don't abut residential areas, I think those that do, we need to have lower density and greater attention to livability in the surrounding area. So there's a lot to balance here. And I welcome your input, Charles, or that of anyone, if you want to speak out on it. And I'm also happy to come back or engage with you again once we get the revised plan from Empire State Development Corp.
Thank you. And Sylvia's next with the question.
Hi, Mark.
Hey,
Thank you
Sylvia,
for-
great to
thank
see you.
for coming. I'm looking at your transportation platform, and I have two questions. One
Please.
is that I'm confused by its meaning. And the first is this: I'll read to you your platform: to work with other leaders in government to advocate for an expansion of ferry service north of 125th Street and across the river, permanent free buses across Manhattan, residential parking permits to reduce congestion. I understand the first three parts of that, which certainly make a lot of sense. River, this, make an expansion there of our ability to get around the city. What do you mean, number one, by permits to reduce congestion, parking permits to reduce congestion? And my second question is, what is your opinion on congestion
pricing? Is that what you mean? Yeah. Very quick on the ferries. Thank you, Sylvia. I'm never sure if anyone actually reads these platforms, but thank you for validating the work that my great team put into doing that. So on the ferries, I'm pushing both for north-south expansion and east-west expansion. Now, on the north-south front, I'd like to see service. It could be potentially a hybrid express and local model, but there are half a dozen obvious ferry stops up and down the Hudson River. 14th Street, for example, near Hudson Yards, up 79th Street, Boat Basin. There are 6 or 7. I am heartened by the addition of a line that at least touches the west side. But to me, it's not the ideal route. First off, it goes to Battery Park City as opposed to Wall Street. And I think Wall Street is where you could connect to the other ferry lines. And then it goes to deep into Staten Island, which is not a big demand from West Siders. So that's the ferry service. Then on the east-west, I want a line from the piers at 125th Street over to Weehawken. I know that doesn't impact Chelsea. Then on the buses, just very, very quick, we have got to bring people back to mass transit. We are facing a car apocalypse. Congestion's already out of control, and the Midtown office buildings are only like 20% full. We've got to get people back to mass transit, including buses. And this is, to me, a bold, big idea to get people back on buses, which actually would not cost the MTA that much money. And I can go into why that is, but it's been done in a dozen or so smaller cities around the country, and it's dramatically improved bus ridership, and something that I want to do for our buses here. Residential parking permits. We're the only big city in the country that doesn't have a program like this. And so what you see is suburbanites driving in, dumping their cars on neighborhood streets because they don't want to pay for a garage. And maybe even if it's not near their office, they'll dump it on the street and then they'll hop on the subway again to avoid paying for a garage. And it's just not fair. And you see it up and down Manhattan. And there's a better solution, which is residential parking permits. It would probably be electronic at this point. I don't think you'd have stickers. There are different versions of this. One version is that it's only in place overnight, or only in place in the middle of the day, because for commuters, you could, if it applies in the middle of the day, well, they're out of luck. But I have a bill on this which would authorize this on a community board by community board basis. And my sense is that you all are in CB2, right? I forget, or CB2. Are you in CB2? You're in CB?
Oh, CB4.
Oh, CB4, sorry.
Charles is 4, I'm 5.
Right, okay. I've definitely heard CB2, and I think CB4, there's a lot of interest in this. The current administration has resisted this, unfortunately. At this point, I think it's going to take a turnover at City Hall, but it's going to be a major priority for me as borough president. And I'm hopeful we'll have a good partner in the mayor. And but to me, it's an inspiring solution to a very vexing problem.
What about congestive pricing?
I strongly support it for two reasons. One, congestion is already at pre-pandemic levels, and most of the offices are not full. So imagine what it's going to look like when we fill up Midtown. It's going to be hellish gridlock, and that impacts our economy. It prevents emergency vehicles traveling. It has environmental impacts. It has safety impacts. It's really a big problem. But there's a second issue, which is we need to generate revenue for mass transit. And this plan could generate about $1.5 billion a year, which would fund tens of billions of capital investments, because you borrow against it. All the things that we need to do, from better signaling to flood resiliency to more elevator access to new subway cars. Now, there's a lot of questions about the implementation, and I think there's a fair question about what happens for people who live in the zone, as all of you do.
Yep, the
And
carve-out.
right, so there could be a discount or a carve out of some sort. I'm not sure exactly what the right policy is there, but I do think that people who live in the zone need some accommodation. And I'm welcome to hear what you all think. There are a lot of people asking for carve outs right now, all around the city. And if you grant too many of them, then you have to raise the base price to be an insane level. So we don't want to do that. But I think the people in the zone have a pretty strong case. But tell me, Sylvia, your perspective on that.
Well, I think there should be a carve out for a section of our area, which is not where I am, but definitely Penn South is a huge community.
Yep.
Very large buildings. People live there. It's
Yep.
It's a lower, we have a lot of teachers there, a lot of local people there. And it's got a massive population of people
Right.
that go to work every day. Some drive their cars. And to be charged to leave and charged to come back home,
Right.
of people that already are not making huge salaries,
Yep.
is very problematic. It's
Yeah.
a real, I mean, if there is any block that needs a carve out,
Yep.
it's Penn South with all those people.
Can I,
Yep.
can I say
It's a
something about that?
frightening thought. I'll leave my co-leader. Was that you, Charles?
Yes, yeah.
I'll leave my co-leader to,
Please, Charles. Love to hear your perspective.
Well, as a member I'm a member of the board of directors on Penn South, and it's going to pose a serious problem for many of our cooperators, not only us, but the public housing that adjoins us on 9th Avenue, Chelsea Elliott House and the Fulton houses, all which have people have income problems, especially in these days. So I think there has to be some kind of, if this is going to be implemented, which it looks like it's going to be, then there has to be some kind of consideration for people who live within the area.
Yeah.
And that's the serious problem about this. So if you own a car here, for instance, in Penn South, and you use it for work and come back and forth, that becomes a very expensive proposition.
Yep. I hear you on that.
I think that's something that must be considered in the process.
it's a big voting block too.
That is true.
That's
You know what I
Of course.
mean?
But of course, I just want to do the right
I don't
thing.
want to say it's not the place to piss off, but when you think that they've been there under a certain cooperative plan, Charles mentioned, I think
Right.
it goes back to 1958 or 59. I just sent the plan to my grandson to study at school. It's, the people there have been living very decent, lives, and to hit them both ways with pricing for living, I could see hitting the people on the High Line that don't live there at all. Anybody that has an apartment that's blank, black, and vacant, 99% of the time, because I mean, I know this for experience, we cannot even get in to those buildings because nobody's there. They're owned by foreigners. So I could see certain blocks really being hammered and it wouldn't bother me at all. But the Penn South area, and as Charles mentioned, Hudson Guild area. Did you say Elliott House too, Charles?
Elliott, Chelsea, and Fulton houses.
It's painful to see people that are looking at this program or prospective program as another fearful way of cutting into their income. Food's gone up. Not everybody has a special permit where they're getting passes to ride the subways for free. And so it's another dent in the income, and it's scaring them. It's a concern to the whole area, and I'm sure they'd probably love to speak to you privately as well.
Happy to.
And Sylvia, it's not just Penn South and Chelsea Elliott. I'm on the other end of Chelsea, on the southeast side of Chelsea. I'm still working. I'm paying payroll taxes. I'm paying through the nose to live in Manhattan taxes. I'm paying New York State taxes. And now if I have a client on Long Island and I have to drive there, I'm going to be charged again to drive out and drive back home. I mean, really, and how much taxing are they going to do to us in Manhattan? Now, if you want to take people who are coming in to the city and they're choosing to drive into the city from Staten Island, and they're choosing to drive in from Connecticut and all these other places, they're already paying tolls. This is another toll. But to tax us again is outrageous. And what about, what if you're elderly and you need to use car service to get someplace? If you have to go up to 72nd Street, you're gonna get hit with that too. How much is enough until everybody who can afford is going to leave this city?
Thank you, Roberta. I know Liz also had her hand up.
I did. My question is not about congestion pricing, but to follow up on the conversation, has it ever been considered of doing a tax credit for people who live in the congested pricing area so that they can apply, much like if you have a car and it's in a garage, you can get a refund of, the tax on a garage is 9% as opposed to 18%. Is there some sort of tax credit that the city can work on to give to residents below in the area of Manhattan for congested pricing so that they ultimately get some sort of rebate for the congested pricing? I don't think you can do it dollar for dollar, but considering some sort of tax
the system will be all electronic, Liz. No toll booths. Either people have an easy pass that gets charged, or there'll be a license plate reader that takes a picture and mails you a paper bill. The advantage of an electronic system is you can have variable pricing at different times or different days of the week, off peak and on peak. But also you could have people who register their Easy Pass tag, for example, as an exempted group. So I think I think the technology is there. And it's just a matter of making sure that we get this right, and that people who are vulnerable and would really face economic hardship who live in the zone are carved out.
Right, but I mean, I have a question about something else, but my point is that sometimes even the people who are not seen as technically vulnerable still live on a paycheck to paycheck, and it's tight living in New York, and that is, like in a budget. So I think residency and to Sylvia's point, an active residency should be considered in congested pricing, just putting it out there, because I think, it's not just the vulnerable, It is the people who live paycheck to paycheck in Manhattan, get taxed in Manhattan, have all the taxes that's subject to them in living in Manhattan. I think sometimes that, it's not just the vulnerable who live paycheck to paycheck. And I think that sometimes goes unspoken. So I think if it is so electronic, that something should be considered for the residents who live in that area. But that was not my question. So we can move on. These are the things you're going to tackle as the next.
I can't wait. By the way, folks, I do have another event at 8. So, but I'll try and get a couple quick questions in if I can.
All right. My question was really more about construction and like how you see construction and dealing with construction, because as they say, all politics is local. On 14th and 6th, they're building adjacent residential high rises across the street from each other, which seems to be a very bad fault. And so what, as you as borough president, would propose to do something about, how construction is managed here in Manhattan?
Well, you're the construction safety expert, Liz, so I feel like I should probably have you give me guidance on this. But I am certainly worried about the number of low road contractors who are cheating on prevailing wage, often running non-union jobs, and safety on those jobs is far, far worse than the developers who are doing the right thing, union jobs. So, I'm grateful for the work you've done to help bring some accountability to developers who are not doing right by workers and safety. And I'll support continuing that effort of accountability as borough president, but would welcome your feedback on what you want me to prioritize.
All right, good luck.
Okay, if we
Great.
can just, thank you so much. If we could squeeze in a quick one from Roberta.
Yeah, the New York Job Survival Act has been bouncing around in the city council. And right now, with what's happening with all of our small businesses, there was no protection. For years, we have been clamoring for this, and everybody's saying, oh, legally, you can't do it. There's a whole lot of BS around this, and nobody's done anything. And now our small businesses are dying, even worse than they were before the pandemic. I mean, it's horrendous. If you walk down a block, there are no protections for these small businesses. If we had the Job Survival Act passed, at least they would have had something in place. But the city council has chosen to do Zippo. They just keep saying this isn't legal. And that's not an answer, because we have legal, we have lawyers who have looked at this and said, that's really not true. So instead we have nothing. And before you turn around, we're gonna have another Houston, we're gonna look like every other city. And I'd like to know what you plan to do about that.
Well, Roberta, I really appreciate the question, and apologies that I'll have to go in a minute or two. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of the Small Business Job Survivals Act, have been since my earliest days in the council. And I don't chair the committee. I'm not the lead sponsor on the bill, so I might not be able to give you the kind of in-depth update you're looking for, but I certainly support the legislation. And I've also recently, as I mentioned earlier this evening, joined on as a co-sponsor of a bill by Councilmember Steve Levine, which would create a system of commercial rent control. So it's kind of a companion to the SBSJA. There was a hearing on that last week. It's a really big deal. Never had a hearing before. So there's some momentum there. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the waning days of this session, but it'll be a new council speaker, new mayor. I will continue my advocacy for these policies and small business more broadly, and happy to connect with you directly on this anytime, Roberta.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
Thank you so much, Mark, for coming and speaking with us tonight. Thank you. And we look forward to you coming back we have you for October 21st. That's when the Empire Station Complex Plan, our program has been postponed to. And 1 week before that, on October 14th, we'll be doing a spotlight on Alvin Bragg. And November, we're going to be having a program on congestive pricing. And December 5th, be it either over Zoom or in person. We'll be having our holiday party. So we have lots of things coming up. Keep an eye out for our e-blast and on our website. And yes, anyone have final thoughts before?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
This was a
Thank you.
wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
CRDC.
very much.
All
Thank
right.
you
Oh,
again,
yeah.
Mark.
Bye-bye.
Right.
And this program
very
has
much.
been recorded. It will be uploaded, and we look forward to seeing you next month at on October 15th and the 21st for our next program.
Bye now.
And have a
Well,
good
Take
night,
care.
everybody.
Can I?
Yep. Sure, Charles, what's up?
We're having London Terrace. There's a flea
That's
market
right,
run
that's right.
On
London
Saturday.
Terrace on Saturday between 10 and 5. We're going to have a table there. Welcome anybody who would like to participate and help us for an hour or half an hour, whatever time they have.
We're gonna have pens, we're
to-
gonna have flyers, and I heard it's gonna be a wonderful event, and I'm very
Hey,
much looking forward.
Please join us. Okay.
Thank you
Good
for
night,
the
everyone.
reminder of that, Charles. Okay, everyone have a good night, and those that are
Bye.
coming on
Thank you, Mindy.
Saturday,
Thank you,
I'll
Mark.
see you then.
Bye.
Hey,
Bye.
Stephanie, have a good night, everybody. Julie, I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night, all.
That was fast.